Okay, I think in the very short term, the impacts will be driven very much by the uncertainty that surrounding where we go from here. Markets generally thrive on certainty, so to have the situation where we are now from an SME perspective is not ideal. We've already seen exchange rate movements with the pound reducing against the dollar and the euro, which is beginning to make imports a little bit more expensive. So that's impacting unit costs for importers, and in some respects could dampen demand in the not too distant future. There could be delays in projects as well, capital investment as a result of the uncertainty, and purchasing generally may be impacted. So there could be a reduction in overall economic activity in the not too distant future, which SMEs will need to prepare for. I think industries will be impacted in different ways. So construction, for example, may well be impacted differently from manufacturing and servicing, but nonetheless, regardless of the industry that you're in, I think that you need to be prepared for what comes in relation to that. But whilst there's a lot of doom and gloom around, I think there's also opportunity that can emerge. The exchange rate changes, for example, create opportunity for in exporters. So if you are an exporter, it gives you an opportunity to invest in existing markets and also try and develop new markets as well. So there are risks for SMEs, particularly given where SMEs generally tend to be in the overall value chain. SMEs are often hardest hit when economic activity reduces. For example, if the UK goes into recession, customers may reduce orders, they may ask for price reductions. And on the supply side, suppliers themselves may be suffering from increases in their costs and therefore want to pass those on to SMEs. And in fact, in some cases, they may struggle to get supply. This means that quite often the SME is in a vulnerable position, being in the middle of that value chain. But there are things that the SME can do to mitigate those effects, even in the short term. One of the practical things to do is to go and talk to the customers and find out what their plans are, given the uncertainty. Means you can adjust earlier to volume changes from the clients and start to plan supplies and your businesses accordingly. Similarly, talk to suppliers and find out how things are impacting them on their side, particularly if their costs are going up and what that might mean for the SME itself. But it's not just about the external, it's about the internal as well. It's an opportunity for the SME to look at their business and say, well, what cost am I incurring that perhaps I don't need to incur? Because if you don't need to incur the cost, then you can actually keep that cash within your business to help as a buffer for any uncertain events that sort of crop up into the future. That also entails perhaps a review of investment plans. So if you're planning some capital investment, and particularly if it involved some debt funding off the back of that, or a large reduction in cash resources, that's something that you might want to reconsider, at least in the short term, until things become a lot clearer. But above all, I think it's make sure that as a business you have enough cash. Whilst a business can survive by being loss-making for some time by active management of cash, if the business actually runs out of cash, then really it's got nowhere to go. So I think the key is to keep profits within the business, make sure there's enough liquidity within the business, and see where you go from there. We talked about the short-term impact and what SMEs can do, but what about the longer term? What can an SME do to ensure they are prepared for any future problems? And the main thing there is to make sure there is a well-developed set of plans and goals. Clarity on what it is that the SME is trying to achieve, how they're going to go and achieve that, what resources are likely to be needed to fulfill those goals, what is going to stop the SME from achieving those goals, and what are they going to do to mitigate the likelihood of those things happening. All those things are very helpful to provide clarity to the business, particularly in times of uncertainty. Alongside that, I think there is the development of some scenarios. So thinking about what happens if things don't go to plan. How is the business going to react in those different situations? Particularly if, for example, there are opportunities that present themselves. How are you going to exploit those opportunities and get the funding required to do that? What resources may be required at that point in time, and how are you going to get hold of those resources? Similarly, if there is a large reduction in business, how are you going to cope with that? What structural changes would you make within your business? And when would you make those structural changes to make sure that the business adjusts appropriately for the marketplace it sees in front of it? In terms of financial arrangements, there are things the SME can do to make sure that it is well positioned should a blip occur in the economic environment over the next few months or years. The main thing is making sure that the SME has enough access to funding lines, particularly in terms of working capital. It may even be worth paying a small premium in terms of arrangement fees for the comfort of knowing that you're unlikely to run out of cash during a prolonged period of uncertainty or economic downturn. But it also puts the business in a good position should it need to take advantage of any opportunities that arise. So, for example, if a rival business decides to exit the market, you can take advantage of that without compromising your own stability in relation to your cash flows. It's not just about the financial arrangements, it's about the cash flows within the business generally as you go through your day-to-day activities. And there are practical things that you can do to make sure that your cash position is optimised. For example, making sure that debts are collected on time and that your customers are not taking too much credit from you, particularly if they're outside of terms. The converse to that is making sure that maximum credit is taken from the suppliers to your business without actually compromising the relationship by going outside of terms with them. Similarly, making sure that your stock levels are optimised so they're there to facilitate your trade, but you're not tying up too much cash by overstocking is another way that you can actually make sure that your cash flows remain sensible. Other things internally as well, that's all about the trading side, but internally it's making sure that any spend in the business is spend that is absolutely required and not inappropriate, or that you don't spend money on things that are not technically required at this point in time. And I guess the last thing is to make sure that the profit within the business, as much of that as possible, is retained in the balance sheet to help the business itself, and so the business relies less on external creditors. The future then is in your hands, not those of others.